Order the Planning and Zoning Commission of Wednesday, December 1st, 2021, 7 p.m. Introduction of commission members.
Kiana Top,
Doug Regeller, John Emery.
Ruth Holstrom,
and Friedman House.
Okay. Anybody object? I don't know. If I don't read the opening statement?
No.
Okay. Approval of the agenda.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
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 All those against, say nay. So approved. Approval of the minutes of November 17th, 2021.
Move to approve.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those against, say nay. So approved. Public forum, seeing no public, we'll move on. Public hearing to recommend adoption of the new comprehensive plan Ames 2040.
All right, so good evening, Planning and Zoning Commission. Tonight, we are one step away from concluding the Ames Plan 2040 comprehensive plan update process. You have had a chance back in September to look at the draft plan, and City Council took some public comment and made some directions back in October to proceed with the plan. It's substantially what you had seen before. There were some very minor tweaks that City Council directed to move forward with. A number of them included some map cleanup items in terms of the future land use map. There might be a small number of those also in the next 2 weeks, just again, cleaning up everything in terms of to how we looked at it and made sure that those edits made it into the final map. So what we're asking for tonight is a recommendation from the Planning and Zoning Commission to move forward with approval of the plan. The other element that has been added since September is the implementation chapter, which really is a consolidated list for the most part of all the policies and implementation measures. But it does have at the beginning kind of what those core priorities are for us to work on first. The plan has a lot of, as we talked about back in September, it's more of a visioning guide, has a lot that is left to implementation. So we need to choose our priorities on what we want to tackle first. And that beginning section of the implementation chapter does describe kind of in 3 separate categories where we need to focus our energy, as suggested by staff and City Council said to put it into the plan this way. The specifics of those will come back through different adjustments to the municipal code, whether that's the subdivision code, whether that's a zoning ordinance update, or whether that's a specific plan that comes as a separate project. And you'll notice there's one other category for public improvements. The plan really isn't going to get realized without some capital investment by the city. Those shares of investment in terms of extending infrastructure to the growth areas, possibly, redoing infrastructure within the city where intensive infill is necessary. Those types of activities would really fall into our city's 5-year capital improvement program. So what the way this is described in the comprehensive plan, that we need to use that process to identify infrastructure needs and look at that in the annual budget cycle. This plan doesn't supersede the CIP. The CIP needs to fit into the umbrella or under the umbrella of the comprehensive plan, so that we're looking at not just our maintenance needs, but our extension and improvement needs through the goals of this plan as well. So with that, that's what I'm going to conclude with. We can discuss any of the chapters, any of the information in the plan, review the land use map if you're interested in that. But really, I'm here for any questions you have on the plan.
This whole plan is nothing set in stone. It's just the guidelines, right?
It's more than guidelines. And any action through the planning and zoning lens must be consistent with that plan. So when you're looking at rezoning a project, you're looking at doing annexation, any of those things must be consistent with the plan. Now, the plan for the most part, is not mandating absolutes at all times. It is pretty open to annexing in multiple directions compared to the old plan that said we're only going to do one thing and we're going to do it in a specific order. This has acceptable ways to do it in multiple areas of the plan. But there are still some absolutes. There's minimum density expectations. There's a correlation that, like the land use map is really more mandatory. You can't say, oh, it's shown as single family residential, I'm just going to skip that and I'm just going to go to a commercial site here. That would take a plan amendment. So it kind of depends on which level of the plan you're looking at of what's mandatory or not. The map itself is pretty mandatory. Some of the policies about development are mandatory, but a lot of it is guiding future decisions that need to be done in terms of either ordinance amendments or new policies for city council to consider for the city.
It's quite the document. Was it 141 pages? Like around there?
Yeah, it's about 140.
Massive, fairly massive. I had a couple of clarification questions. And I think I might have picked this up in the staff rec that went to the council last time, probably. That's probably where I picked it up from. But it was talking about some changes to the southwest area of not keeping, or I think there was a suggestion either through public or through council about changing it to keeping it open space. But I think there was some staff recommendation of keeping it, was it R5 or RN5? Am I getting that right? Could you speak a little bit about that just to help my understanding what's going on there?
So were you talking about the commercial area along Mortensen, or were you talking about the extraterritorial area to the southwest?
I think it might be further south of Highway 30.
So what we had was, just to help people get oriented, if you can see my cursor, this is the former southwest growth area from the 97 plan. And then this area also a little bit further east, all the way over to state, was also considered part of the southwest at that time. So what we show in here is this land right in here, RN3, which is that floating suburban kind of designation. RN5 is high density. So it wasn't ever high density. It was RN3 in the map. So we had two different sets of comments. We had some people saying this area right in here should not be in the plan as an area that could be annexed and developed, because there's clearly wooded lands there. Worley Creek runs through there as a sensitive area. They had asked that just be left out, just be open space. Staff advocated that it should be left in. We can address the natural area concerns through development standards. And since water and sewer abuts that area, it's a logical extension of an existing facility. Staff thought that met our general growth ideas and that we should leave it in. So City Council left it as RN3, which really matches how it's always been shown since 97. And then further to the west of South Dakota over here, there were some separate comments about, it's a little bit harder to explain because if you remember back in the scenario evaluations, we looked at a lot of different growth areas and then we sliced it into tiers and we picked the most easily or readily developable areas as our first tiers of growth. But that didn't mean there couldn't be other growth in the future. And we had left that south area, again, right in this area. It's not currently shown as development, but it is reserved to be able to expand there in the future. And people in that area had advocated to, again, leave it out of the plan, that it didn't need to be shown in any way as a tier, and it should be thought of maybe as a rural residential area. So staff's comment on that was, again, it's not shown right now as growth, but it is definitely serviceable. And we thought it was more appropriate to reserve it as a future urban area rather than say it's available for rural residential kind of development patterns. So those are kind of the two camps of comments for that southwest part of town. So council took no action to remove the southwest from anything, and nor did they remove that RN3 area from the land use map.
And Athens has no control over what Iowa State does with their land at all.
Correct. State land does not have any governmental jurisdiction by a local government when it's used for state purposes. that doesn't mean they can go build something that's in the market on state land and pretend that it's not subject to local standards. If it's for a state purpose, then then they're exempt from local control.
The feed mill?
It's for state purpose.
Is any of the land there in that southwest area that's shown as RN3, is it currently owned by the university or the state?
There is, so I'll zoom in a little bit. So for the most part, and this might be one of those corrections that gets adjusted by city council at the end. Why can't I pan? So right here, this triangle piece, it is actually a state-owned piece of land. They have a animal science farm facility there. They have asked that be shown as university land on that triangle. This RN3 piece over here, it's also their land. It's I think it's pasture now. It's always been shown as this potential for suburban development to occur there. That may or may not get adjusted in the plan, but I think the triangle piece probably will because it is an existing ISU facility. The other land to the west, this is all private property.
Okay.
South of Zumwalt Station Road is all Iowa State land.
Okay.
City own the old rail line there?
I don't remember right now if we are the owners or not.
I think I remember that it being said or reading that the city doesn't envision itself ever growing west past the county line into Boone County. Is that?
Nope. So we actually show the land use patterns right here. This is County Line Road right through here. This is North 500th Avenue. So we clearly show planned expansion of the city to the west into Boone County. That's new. That's not in the 97 plan. That's new as part of the Sames Plan 2040 plan. And that's one of the areas, I think you're not directly involved in how rural water systems are, but I think I gave you guys an update that to support growth to the west, we're looking at an agreement with Xenia Rural Water for how they would provide water service to growth in that area. And that's one of those areas in the
Maybe that's why I
west.
think that maybe it stems from that.
Say that again.
Maybe that's why I had that in my mind, why that was.
Well, prior policy was city only city water would serve development within the city. Council has passed the agreement in principle. Xenia has passed the agreement in principle to allow for Xenia Rural Water to be the water provider in certain areas of the city upon annexation. Not everywhere, but the west is one of those.
And right now they provide it up north some.
Not in the city. So only if we inherited you as part of an annexation are you on Xenia Water. If you're any new development, you're on city water at this point in time. And the expectations here in that agreement is whether you're in Xenia territory or city territory, Xenia will require, we will expect and require infrastructure to city standards. Normally, Xenia does not have to build the city standards. So that's what the agreement covers, is their obligations to meet city water flow and city pressure requirements with pipes that meet our SUDA standards.
Can you remind me if there have been conversations with Cyride about any expansion or scope of where their services might be offered in the future in context with the plan? And I'm thinking again mostly on the west side of as it goes, or the west from Dakota
So,
along.
I mean, Cyride early on would participate, but it's just beyond their scope of planning because it's really a financial question for them. And they don't project out resources to the extent that we show land use planning. So it's really incumbent upon us as the land use planners to have areas that can be served if SciRide is able to afford to provide that service. So SciRide isn't really directive of how to do the planning, other than some very basic things about having corridors on arterial streets that are logical extensions of where they have lines would be a good thing to do, which I think we've accomplished with our nodes of commercial and our assumptions for density in certain areas.
Do we know if they have some kind of a strategic plan or something coming up in the future?
They just did SciRide 2.0 about 3 years ago, which was a revamp of the system to be more efficient at serving different needs. But it's all about financial planning, and that's obviously in a significant state of change with declining enrollment. So how does that work for future SciRide? And to be honest, right, the future SciRide is not going to be about serving students, which is the bulk of ridership. So it's going to be looked at as a city activity and a city funding opportunity, not the current university student primarily funded model that it is now. I mean, it's a third, and a third right now for the budget of SciRide, student, university, and city.
Interesting. On the third page of the staff report, it's talking about redirection areas. And I think that's probably something that's going to be covered in the implementation plan, is probably where it refers to is some of that sub-area or district level plans that might be designed and created for these redirection areas. Can you help identify some of those redirection areas in the maps?
Sure.
What that
But
might be?
they kind of vary greatly. So I'll try to zoom in here a little bit. So there's, I guess it's not going to resolve here. So an example of a small one is up here in North Ames, across from the mall. You have some older, smaller apartments right across the street from the entrance to the mall. That's an example. You have this row of homes right along Duff again. It's kind of a mix of older triplex, duplex, single family home. Again, it's at a state in time where maybe it does have transition. What's that transition to? Those are things that need to be decided more on a block level through some neighborhood input. So that specifically Grove Avenue right there, City Council it's going to be the first one that gets addressed because the neighborhood has asked City Council to look at that probably early next year. So that'll be a very small scale version of what we're talking about. And then there's a much bigger version of it. So the colors are just really hard to distinguish on here. But another example of redirection then will be around the Wheatsfield area. So it's a much bigger area, different scale of buildings with some older office buildings, some apartments, some single family homes. What really are opportunities there for probably more intense development over the long term? It's probably not going to be next year, but in 15 years, is that a reasonable thing? And the same with to the south of the tracks there. That area was already identified in the Lincoln Way Corridor Plan as a potential focus area for change. It's where we're proposing the Indoor Aquatic Center to be located right now. So again, that would be once that facility's there, is there a change there that we want to see as well? So there's a couple of different locations across the city. They're a different scale. They're signaling that the city believes change is probably desirable or would likely occur in those areas. We're not sure what the answer is, but we should look at that on a more holistic level rather than just by a project level. That's really why those designations came in there, that there's basically more than one site that's worth investigating.
Going back to that North Ames location, has there been any talk about looking at the mall area again? As you're looking at some of those areas around or across from the mall on Grand, has there been any discussion, any talk about looking at the mall at all?
The mall itself is
Like
just
the overall master plan for that area?
no. The mall is just it is commercial. It is planned to be commercial, stay as a community commercial, regional commercial kind of area. So I think the reason we have for that is that format of retailer. We don't have another location to replace that in the city. It's fairly accessible to a large amount of the population, and to to look at redevelopment, you would normally see that format, the larger formats disappear basically and go to other locations. So at this point, we haven't seen a reason to want to push relocation of those anywhere else.
Yeah, and I wasn't necessarily thinking of relocation. The thing that prompted me was trying to remember if it was last year or the year before. We had that new smaller development on the intersection of Grand and the North Street. I forget what the
30th.
street is. And there was quite some discussion on parking and the excess parking, that what seems to be excess parking at this point. And given how some of that use within the mall is changing, with the way just things are changing across the country right now, if there was thought on how that might, if this was an opportunity to try and see if there's something we can think of in those terms.
So the comp plan didn't directly address that in terms of like a policy issue for a land use designation. It's commercial. I think where that type of issue will come up. We also had a lot of design conversation about if you do add new commercial buildings in these large mall strip center situations, how do you really position those buildings to meet the future goals of the city rather than just huge setbacks from the street? Those types of attributes related to commercial zoning or maybe commercial design guidelines, they would be part of the implementation section. So there's one of the implementation requirements is, or not requirements, program things is going to be update of commercial zoning. And that's where we'll have to look at maybe some of the design aspects, how much parking gets rolled into that more on a kind of a citywide basis rather than a mall specific basis. That's where you'll see that conversation come up.
That was mostly mine. The one more thing sort of that came to attention, which probably I don't even know if it warrants a question. But again, maybe in one of those council documentation, again, it was talking about how the map itself the land use designations does not need to follow very strictly on a parcel by parcel sort of parcel line, but provide staff with a little more flexibility when rezonings come in question later down the line. And I was wondering what the thought process was behind doing that and not adhering to strict parcel lines as you would typically see.
So I guess, I mean, my preference and background is that a land use map is general, zoning is specific. I think the best example for me, the easiest one to look at would be, let me see if I can get, this is a strange PDF viewer, so it doesn't move the way I think it should move. Let's see. I can't scroll. Well, what I want to show you is like the urban corridor designation along Lincoln Way. So this area out west, if you can see that, not very well probably with my cursor. Do we know that that should be 3 lots deep? Should that be 2 lots deep? Should that be 4 lots deep? That's just a level I don't think the comp plan can get to. We looked at it a little bit during the Lincoln Way corridor plan. And again, that's why we want to have some flexibility to look at really what's viable here, because this isn't really a design level document about what's viable. It's about intent for policy to see that. So I think in those kinds of designations, we need a little more flexibility on what really is the depth of that. If you take a future zone change to do it, it's not like you can walk out there today and do it. So it's really just on the edges, and it's probably only in those transition areas that we haven't really figured out what we want to do yet. We just have this idea that we want to pursue this over the next 20 years. For the most part, the redirection areas kind of fit a little bit of that buffer. Again, they're kind of parcel specific, but they're not defined on exactly what's expected either. So we have a lot of flexibility in evaluating opportunities over the next 20 years is really how this is set up.
I have a question. So it says that we're looking at an addition of 15,000 people to the community. Are we talking about like permanent residents? Are we talking about like a mixture of like students and, permanent Ames residents? Or I assumed it was permanent residents, but I don't want to assume.
exactly use that terminology. So the basis of the 15 was an assumption that the student population would not, we did not project an increase in student population. So we didn't say ISU is going to escalate enrollment to 40,000. We said that this will be a static population number,
Okay.
and we'll do a projection from that.
Okay.
So it doesn't mean there isn't students in the 15,000, but we didn't project ISU increases on their own either.
Okay. Thank you. I
So
appreciate that.
I would say it's, for the most part, not a student population. It is a workforce kind of population.
Thank you. The other question though is like, when you're looking at this, is the housing set to meet that 15,000 increase? And then also maybe to have a little bit more housing for some of the people that are, well, I guess they would be part of the 15,000 increase.
So in terms of kind of capacity to meet that projection. So that projection was a pretty healthy 1.5% growth rate back from 2018 projected to 2040. So we haven't recently grown at that rate, but we have had periods of time, like sustained periods of time where we have had that growth rate. So we need to, so we have in the plan, it was calculated out to be around just over 6,000 housing units were necessary to support that population. We have, with the combination of growth areas and the infill opportunities, we well exceed the opportunity to create 6,000 households or 6,000 dwelling units. I think one version of the calculation probably said we have in these diagrams capacity for over 20,000 people easily between the combination of infill and expansion.
Thank you. That's very helpful just to know.
The infill you're talking about is around the core of the city?
So I'd say it's around Lincoln Way for the most part. In various areas, it could be West Ames, like that urban corridor designation. It could be around Campus Town. It's clearly in the downtown area. It could be some of that south of Lincoln Way area as well, which has always been shown as kind of a medium density infill opportunity that really hasn't taken off. So will that really change or not? But those are the main areas for infill. I think of infill as really just those pure areas that are already surrounded by development. Some people broaden the definition of infill to mean you're touching the city and that's somehow infill. I think of that as expansion. So there's probably some other areas that could be thrown in as infill, but for those core areas of the community, kind of focused more around the commercial areas and the Lincoln Way corridor area is really where that is.
Have there been conversations about the impact of COVID and the pandemic to ISU, to the student population, to how it might be impacting this plan, or to how it might impact the phasing of some of these growth areas and how we're planning it out?
No, for two reasons. One, ISU doesn't really project anything out for population and student enrollment beyond what they tell the regents, and they just there's no real ISU is going to do this in the next 5 years. ISU is going to do this in the next 10 years. So that's just not a factor that we can work with as the city. And then I guess my advice and conversations with RDG, our planning consultant, I didn't feel comfortable taking a 18-month time period and saying it's going to fundamentally alter real estate patterns. And that we should think of things differently. I don't think anybody anticipated 15% price increases in homes last year across the city. So that was kind of shocking, right? In the pandemic. So I don't know that we can take anything away from the pandemic in the last 18 months to say it would change a 20-year plan. That was my opinion. RDG concurred with that after we discussed it a little bit. So we did not alter it related to the pandemic. The original planning was all done before the pandemic. We carried all of that assumptions through till now.
This is kind of a maybe not as smart question, but so what exactly are we trying to approve or adopt? I see the alternatives here, but I guess it's just not I'm sorry, for some reason it's not clicking exactly, or what are we being asked to do?
You're asked to recommend approval of a 140-page document tonight.
Oh, so, okay, so that's what I thought, but then I was thinking we're the Planning and Zoning Commission, so that doesn't make sense. So it was getting confused in my brain, sorry.
So
Thank
yes, you have
you.
you have a very specific defined rule that before the city council can act, this commission has to make a recommendation in some shape, form, or manner.
Okay,
That's why.
all right, I just didn't know if there was like
Fundamental
something
rule.
going in with that, like we're changing something, because I'm like, I don't see anything changing. It looks like we're just trying to adopt this, but
I mean,
I didn't know.
if the commission wants to change something,
We
you
can
can
recommend.
make that recommendation.
Okay, I just want to make
Yeah.
sure I did understand it the way I was supposed to.
I guess just because the alternative also asks the commission to consider the amendment process, do you want to run us through that just quickly?
Sure. So that's part of that new information. So we added, because city council hadn't looked at this yet, we just told them we would be adding this. We keep adding a little bit every time we go back to them. So the current land use policy plan defines minor and major amendments. It could be text, it could be maps, it could be either one. And it's really, it really defines the outreach process in terms of what's expected. A minor amendment really requires no outreach. It just has a public hearing with the Planning and Zoning Commission and goes to city council. Versus the major amendment actually has a very elaborate process of defining scope, holding outreach meetings to review options, come back through a hearing process to pick an option, and then go back out and develop more precise plans through a neighborhood meeting process, and then come back through public hearings. It's elaborate. So we're keeping the same labels of minor and amendment just to try, and there are different scales of changes to a plan. One of them might be 1 acre. One of them might be 100 acres, and it probably has different needs. So we're keeping two different types, but we are saying that the processes for public engagement will be defined really through the city council and their policies that they want to apply when the amendments come in. So the expectations is a minor amendment would still have, actually it will have a mandatory public outreach component that doesn't exist today, but we're in all likelihood simplifying the major amendment process to having a public engagement option at the beginning, but not as much back and forth. Now, if we do a sub area plan, that's totally different, right? We're going to go out, solicit information, ideas, needs, work with that, present ideas, get feedback, and then move into developing a plan, which is kind of how the major amendment process, I believe, was meant to work. But it seemed to be applied to projects where there is really only one option. There's not three options to do the project typically. So the major amendment process is now more about like a project level change rather than a sub area plan, which we would treat differently and go through a more involved process. It is technically an amendment to the plan because we're going to add it into a plan when we do a sub area plan, but it's not the same as a project driven change. So the way this is described, it's again, two categories, has some expectations for public engagement at the beginning. Those could be defined or refined by the city council because they're the only authority to initiate any of these changes. So if they want to add conditions that you do certain things, then they have the ability to do that. And there is one unique thing. No one's called me out on this yet. So, so under Iowa law, the commission has a role in the adoption of the plan, and the council ultimately has the authority to adopt the plan. Our local ordinances are the one that say that the commission has to review and make recommendations on amendments. Due to the fact that we're adopting a new plan, there's going to be tweaks that need to happen right now that aren't really amendments to the plan. We did write a small section in here basically to let council make administrative changes without advertising and holding public hearings with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So if there's an error in the wording of something, or there's a map tweak that we figure out in February that we missed in December, those are those things, if they were meant to be done by the intent of the plan, council can just do those administratively. We don't have to advertise public hearings and have outreach on those types of things. Now, if someone wants to change a land use designation and they want to come in and make a change, that's an amendment. That's not an administrative issue. So an administrative issue would only be something that's brought up by staff or council as we're looking through this and trying to apply this to something, versus a developer or a property owner walking in and say, hey, I want to do something that's totally different. That's absolutely going to be an amendment process.
On what categorizes under actions that would be labeled administrative?
So for the most part, it's probably these map changes. Another thing that we have in there, like certain things that are shown on the plan help give you context, like floodplain, but we're not trying to define the floodplain with this map. So if there's informational GIS layers that we need to adjust, we have the ability just to go do that as staff, because we're not changing a land use designation. So the diagram in the plan might be different, but the intent is not different, right? We just defined where that boundary is just a little bit differently. So we might want to substitute a more up-to-date map into the plan. And we think city council should just be able to do that, because it's not an intent of amending anything. It's trying to bring context of supplemental information in. And we had that conversation with them in October about natural areas, because it was a confusing label, because we have it in the fringe plan now, and it means a lot in the fringe plan. But in here, it was kind of trying to show a variety of things. Some of it was floodplain, some of it might be habitat areas, some of it might be wetlands, but it clearly wasn't all of those things all of the time. So city council decided that description was just meant to be informational. It's not a land use designation. So that's another one of those issues where, as we go through this, there's going to be site-specific information that gets generated with development proposals, with annexations. This can help inform people, but it isn't definitive about what natural resources are in the fringe area specifically. In the city, we know what they are. It's in the fringe area where there's usually more evaluation necessary.
Would that be a call then? Would it be correct to say that it would be staff who makes that call, whether with the major and minor amendment, it's fairly clear what falls under each category. But with the admin, then does the staff take that call and take it to council?
Right.
I'm
So
just
city
trying
council.
to understand, how would you, if I was to look for, okay, is this administrative or major or minor? What will help guide me when making that decision?
So on the second page of the appendix, under supplemental information, it's supposed to be pretty narrow. I mean, it's supposed to be in that range of a typo kind of an edit. Someone finally reads a policy they hadn't read before and go, this doesn't make any sense. Did this mean this or that? They can make that decision. Again, if we're going to add GIS layers, which is a constantly evolving data set, we can add those to the maps. It's not meant to in any way be a policy question. If it's a policy question, it needs to be a minor amendment or a major amendment.
Got it.
This is a little unique. I think it's just that question of when you have GIS, and I'm looking at you too, because you work with the GIS data, like you just have so much data and you want to put on a map. Does it have policy meaning or not? It's just something that I felt like we needed to decide and say whether it is or not. So that's what I was trying to get to.
Well, I mean, so for instance, I mean, some of that could have implications for policy. For instance, like when the 2019 floodplain maps got updated, obviously there were areas then that got adjusted somewhat. So could that have some effect, say, if they were to get adjusted again?
So on this map, I
Future.
say no,
Okay.
because this isn't supposed to be defining the floodplain. It's supposed to be telling you in that light green that's an open space designation, which may
Right.
relate to the floodplain, but it's not definitive that you should go scale that off and say that's the floodplain.
Okay. So it doesn't obviously follow necessarily like the floodplain or
Yeah,
floodways
so we had-
specifically, but it just,
So zoning's different, right? So we have
Right.
we have an environmentally sensitive overlay
Mhm.
that is defined based off of the 100 or off the floodway
Right.
component of the floodplain. If those changes happen, then yeah, we need to rezone things to apply those new rules. But on the comp plan level, that's not something that is important to us. I think
Okay.
just generally showing that there's waterways, that there's habitat, I think a lot of that is that informational natural area stuff that we don't know it all. We're not showing it all. It was really tough because we had comments on both sides in October. You're not showing enough, then you're showing too much because this isn't what you think it is. Well, I have a wetland on my property. You should show my wetland. And we're just like, that's not what we're trying to do here. We're not trying to define everything.
My question,
It's the fringe that's the big issue.
my question was when it comes to, when you say that you're any annexation of land, that is not an amendment to the plan. So that means that it doesn't need to come through to the Planning and Zoning Commission beforehand because it's not an amendment.
It is, so we're clarifying two things. One, when you
Yes.
annex, you're supposed to, you'll default to so some of these areas on the map, like let's say this area right here, it's shown as purple for employment. That's not in the city right now.
Yes.
So when that gets annexed, it's going to default to purple. We're not going to debate as an amendment, is it purple or is it yellow as a use? Now, if you don't want to be purple, then that's going to be an amendment because the plan shows you as purple. So we're just trying to be very clear because the public doesn't understand all of the processes.
Some of us don't either.
So just want to be clear that annexation brings you into the city. We have a plan for a default. If you're going to follow the default, it's not an amendment to the plan to bring you into the city.
Okay. So you answered my second question before I asked it. So thank you.
So annexations by city council policy do come before the Planning and Zoning Commission for a recommendation, but that's
Okay,
by policy of the city. That is not in state code.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification and the education.
I'm confused now with the difference between alternative one and number two. You said that you're always making modifications that you're sending up to the
No, I didn't say we always are.
draw.
So there's just again, it's in the appendix. The only thing that we're saying the appendix has nothing to do with the alternatives. Tonight, it is adopt a 140-page document or don't, or suggest edits to the document with your recommendation. That's all we're doing tonight. Big picture. What's in the appendix is how future amendments will be addressed. Not adoption of it tonight.
Okay.
Any other questions?
Again, tremendous work by staff and consultant and everyone put together. I think kudos to everyone involved. I'm comfortable voting and recommending on the plan.
At this time, if there's no further discussion between commission members, I'll entertain a motion.
I can make the motion. I'll make the motion that the commission recommend approval of the plan in accordance with alternative one suggested by staff, which is Plan and Zoning Commission recommends City Council adopt a new comprehensive plan known as Ames Plan 2040 and incorporate the amendment process into the final plan.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. So approved.
All right, December 14th, be on the city council agenda.
Yay.
Awesome.
Commission comments. No comments? Staff comments?
Do we put out tentative agendas anymore, Natalie? Okay, I haven't. I think they've been much more speculative. I do believe we will have a rezoning application for sure on the 15th. So that'll be your last meeting of the year. At least one item that night.
Did you get something else different on that? Now I can't remember the name. County Line Road in Lincoln Way.
Nothing's been,
They're moving
there's,
stuff around again.
yeah, there's no submittal out there yet.
They're doing big dirt work.
I'm aware of that.
Okay. At this time, I will entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
I'll move it.
Oh.
He's my closer. All those in favor? Well,
Awesome.
we are adjourned.
Yay.